Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into one of the most twisted and, frankly, disturbing scandals of our time, the story of Jeffrey Epstein. It's a crazy story of power, of secrets, and a justice system that, well, you'll see. It just seemed to fail over and over again. So let's get into it.
So, where does a story like this even begin? Well, it's not in some stuffy courtroom or a big city. Nope, it starts right here, on this private 75-acre island in the Caribbean. It's called Little St. James. Jeffrey Epstein bought it for about 8 million bucks. And I mean, look at it. On the surface, it's pure paradise, right? You've got these gorgeous beaches, a massive luxury palace, guest villas, pools, the whole 9 yards. But behind all that beauty, something incredibly dark was going on.
And you know what's really chilling? The locals on the nearby islands, they had a name for it. And it wasn't a nickname cooked up by the media. They called it Pedophile Island. Yeah, that alone tells you something truly horrific was happening just beneath that picture-perfect surface.
And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? The island had these two completely different faces. On one hand, for the global elite, this was the ultimate five-star getaway. But for the young girls who were brought there, some of them only 12 years old, it was a prison. I mean, a meticulously designed one. Just think about it. You're surrounded by the ocean. There's literally nowhere to run. We know one 15-year-old girl tried to swim for it. She was caught, and they took her passport away. No escape. So you have to ask, who exactly was visiting this place? Well, the owner, Jeffrey Epstein himself, and get this, he started out as a math teacher before becoming this mega-rich financial advisor. He made it his business to befriend some of the most powerful people on Earth. And the visitor list? It's just wild. We're talking about Britain's Prince Andrew, politicians like former President Bill Clinton, and even, incredibly, the brilliant scientist Stephen Hawking. And for years, all of this stayed completely hidden, a secret. But then in 2005, everything started to change. It wasn't some big raid or a massive investigation that kicked things off. It was a single police complaint filed in Florida by a 14-year-old girl and her parents. And that one complaint, well, it was the thread that would begin to unravel this entire massive conspiracy. Once investigators started digging, they realized something very quickly. This wasn't just one guy committing random acts of abuse. Not at all. This was a highly organized sex trafficking operation, and it was structured just like a pyramid scheme. A cold, calculated system built from the ground up to prey on vulnerable young women. So how does a pyramid scheme like that even work? Well, it's pretty sinister. The whole system was designed to feed itself. Each girl was actually paid extra money to go out and recruit a new girl. So you have one victim bringing in another, who then brings in a third. It created this constantly refreshing supply chain of victims, and the vast majority of them were under 18. Okay, so by 2006, the case against him seems like a total slam dunk. The evidence is just overwhelming. The FBI even launched a special investigation, Operation Leap Year, and it produced this massive 53-page report. They had statements from 36 different minor victims, dozens of witnesses. The charge was international sex trafficking. You hear all that and you think, okay, life in prison. It seems absolutely inevitable, right? But here's the thing. It wasn't inevitable, not even close. Despite that mountain of evidence, something else was happening behind the scenes. A secret deal was being hammered out. And the guy orchestrating it was a federal attorney named Alexander Acosta, who was working with Epstein's high-powered lawyers on a plea deal that would, for all intents and purposes, let him walk. And this was the result of that secret deal. 18 months. Let that sink in. 18 months for running a massive international sex trafficking ring that preyed on dozens of underage girls. He gets a year and a half. And not even in federal prison. It was county jail after pleading guilty to just 2 minor prostitution charges. It's just unbelievable. And I say jail time in quotes because honestly, it was a total mockery of justice. First off, he gets put in a private wing of the Palm Beach County Jail. Then, get this, he was given work release. That meant he could leave the jail and go to his fancy office for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. So really, he was just sleeping at the jail. That was his punishment. So after he's released in 2009, Epstein just goes right back to his life of luxury. Jets, mansions, the works. And the case, it went completely cold for nearly 10 years. It really felt like the system had just failed. But thankfully, there was one investigative journalist out there who just refused to let this story be buried.
Her name was Julie K. Brown, and she worked for the Miami Herald. And after years, I mean years, of digging and fighting for records, she published this absolute bombshell of a series in 2018. It was called Perversion of Justice, and it laid everything out: the crimes, the stories from the victims who had been ignored, and most importantly, it exposed that whole systemic cover-up. The public outrage was immediate and massive. It literally forced the authorities to reopen the case.
So now, the pressure is on. Thanks to that reporting, it's immense. And in July of 2019, it happens. Jeffrey Epstein is arrested again. And this time, it's for real. Federal sex trafficking charges. He was looking at up to 45 years in prison. It finally seemed like justice was about to be served. But then, the story took its strangest, most final turn.
Yeah, you heard that right. Just a little over a month after he was arrested, while he was waiting for his trial, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his jail cell. The official cause of death was ruled a suicide, but the circumstances surrounding it were so strange that it immediately kicked off this massive firestorm of speculation and conspiracy theories. His death was this incredibly traumatic end to a really long and ugly story, and it completely changed the narrative. What started as a case about abuse and a broken justice system, it morphed into something else entirely. It became a story about secrets, about conspiracies, and this huge, tangled web of unanswered questions. The biggest one being, who else was involved? See, with Epstein gone, all of his secrets could have just died with him. And that's when the whole fight for justice pivoted. It moved away from the courtroom and onto a totally new battleground: his secret files. We're talking about the infamous client list, his little black book, the flight logs from his private jet. The question became, who knew what, and when did they know it? Now, this is where the source material that we're looking at today paints a really interesting picture. It lays out this speculative scenario of what could happen next, turning this whole thing into a political firestorm. In this scenario, the files become a huge issue in the 2024 U.S. presidential election, with a candidate like Donald Trump promising voters he'd release every single document. And in this speculative story from our source, what happens next is a complete 180. After the election, the new administration does a total U-turn. The Justice Department suddenly announces the client list does not exist, and the president himself starts dismissing the whole thing as a boring Democrat hoax that never ends. A complete reversal. But with all the public pressure building, some files do eventually get released. The catch? They're almost completely blacked out. Just imagine page after page covered in thick black lines hiding names, dates, entire paragraphs. Honestly, they ended up hiding way more than they actually revealed. And yet, even with all those black marks, some pretty startling details did manage to come out. Donald Trump, who was a friend of Epstein's for about 20 years, was mentioned over and over. There were emails suggesting he flew on Epstein's private jet 8 different times. And then there was this, an even more shocking allegation from a 2020 call to the FBI, where a limousine driver claimed that Trump and Epstein had raped a woman together back in 1999. So you can see how releasing just bits and pieces like this didn't bring any closure at all. If anything, it just made the mystery deeper. It made it painfully clear that the full story, the real story, was and still is being kept under wraps. And this number, right here, this is really the key to everything. We're talking about over 1 million documents related to the Epstein case that have still not been released to the public. 1 million. The official line from the Justice Department is that they're still redacting them, a process that they claim could take weeks. But, people are still waiting. And all of this leaves us with the biggest, most unsettling question of all. We're at the end of this explainer, but the story itself is nowhere near finished. That little black book is still sealed. Powerful names are still lurking in the shadows, and the full, terrifying scope of this conspiracy of silence, we may never truly know.